So welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Reimagining Performance Management. This is part of AKT's Digital HR Insights series. We are thrilled to let you know that this webinar is oversubscribed today. There is also a strong delegation from SAP SuccessFactors, where AKT is a global gold partner, so thanks for joining. Let me first introduce AKT to those who are first-time guests. AKT has built a solid understanding and proven track record in both HR consultancy and HR cloud implementation services, with a number of customers across Europe and the Middle East. Our operations have several offices across Europe, but with more than 100 HR and SuccessFactors experts, we can truly support customers wherever they may require. Our speakers today, Yoav Ventura and Eitan Bernstein, are seasoned HR experts who together have led most of the SuccessFactors and HR transformation projects that AKT has accomplished these past 15 years, and so have firsthand experience of the HR challenges being faced by companies today.
I assume most of the people on this call are here because there's a very strong feeling that everybody hates performance management. With a lot of recent articles and all the financial newspapers around why people hate HR. That's not the only thing, just the personal feelings. There's a lot of research showing that HR that the performance management processes are just not providing the value that companies expect from them, with only very few companies reporting that the performance management process is creating value for them. It's not actually driving people to perform better. It's not actually, in many cases, giving valuable feedback and development. It's not actually improving the way the company delivers its services and products. And so companies are struggling to say, is this worth the investment that we're making around this process? And I think many companies have criticism of the process for good reason. The timing of the process is when it's comfortable for HR or comfortable for the business, usually in the beginning of the year. Who said that's the right time to evaluate people? It's actually a horrible time for the finance people who are trying to close the year, and may not be relevant for project people who are actually between milestones and working. The frequency with most companies doing the process once a year or maybe twice a year is just not adept to the expectations today and for the rate that things are happening in the organization. The idea of force distribution, which was created about 40 years ago with the beginning of performance management as we know it today, assumes that every organization has great performers, medium performers, and low performers. But that's not necessarily true. And small organizations or high-performing organizations may not adhere to that rule, and creating a lot of tension and issues around creating force distribution within that organization. Most performance management processes historically have been backward oriented. They've looked at the performance in the last year, summarizing what I did and how I did it. While most people will say the past is in the past, we want to look forward. We want to spend our energies thinking about the future and what we're going to do and how I'm going to develop around that. The historic performance management processes view the direct manager, the next level manager, as a single source of a truth around employee performance. But in today's modern organizations, many managers don't have direct contact every day with employees. The employees may actually have much more interaction with other people within the organizations, internal partners and customers, and the manager may not even know a lot about the performance of the individual, may not see them on a regular basis. And last but not least, and there are many others, the companies have spent incredible amount of effort on calibration, on energy to make sure that there's a single aligned truth that high performers are similarly high performers and the low performers are similarly low performers, and managers and executives spend hours and days and sessions and meetings to do that calibration. And there's a big question of whether that is providing real value and that effort and time is worth continuing. And so there's no surprise that there are a lot of companies calling for throwing out performance management and trying other things. We take the position, which we'll show you during this whole call today, that although there are a lot of things that are broken with the current performance management processes in many organizations, we believe that it's not yet time to kill performance management. It's time to reimagine it and reinvent it because there are some aspects that performance management is aimed to achieve that are still very, very important and relevant for the organization, although over time, the processes that most companies have adopted are not effective and not efficient anymore. We go back to question, before we give you our answer, our approach, we go back to question, what are we really trying to achieve in this process? When we strip away all the structure and bureaucracy and technicalities that the process has adopted over the few decades that it exists in organizations, to remember what we're actually trying to achieve. And we believe that these 5 things are still critical and hold true for most organizations most of the time. Okay? We think most organizations, most companies are still trying to achieve that every employee that walks in every morning will be working on the right things, will know what's important to the company, will be focusing on achieving the right results and creating the right outcomes for the organization. And as things change rapidly and with our VUCA and ever-changing environment that we're operating in, that they realign all the time, so they're focused on doing the things that are important for the company. We think that's important. We also think that most organizations strive to have each person in the organization working professionally, working efficiently, working effectively, and constantly improving. And in order to do that, they need to know whether they're working in these ways and what they can do to constantly become more professional and more efficient and more effective in what they're doing. We believe that every company is trying at some degree to identify who their great people are, who their incredibly high performers are, who their low performers who may need some help or maybe not fit in the organization, and all kinds of other key populations, whether it's high potentials, whether it's people with core knowledge or talent, that the organization wants to identify and know who they are in order to link that to other processes, HR processes the organization does. We believe that most companies still believe that compensation is a tool that needs to be used in a differentiated way, and that it should be tied in some way to differences between the performance contribution and future capabilities and growth of the employees. Whether it's base salary, short-term incentives, or long-term incentives need to be tied into individual parameters, one of one kind or another. And we believe that most companies are still looking and understand that the development and growth of the employees in their organization should address both gaps in their performance, but also their interests and challenges toward their future growth and what motivates them and where they see themselves in the future. And assuming these 5 objectives are still objectives your organizations are still interested, at least in some of them, then the performance management, stripping away the things that have been added on, is still trying to achieve all or some of these objectives. And we think those objectives are still very relevant. So we stopped and we said, if those objectives are relevant, what needs to change? And what will new performance management look like in order to fit into the world we're living in now, the emerging world that we call the digital age, a world that moves much faster, that has a lot more flow of information, that things change in a much more rapid pace? What will that look like? What are the principles and design aspects that we need to take into account to make performance management do something different and fit this time better? There are 3 principles which I won't get into in depth today, but we find them very important, and many organizations are slowly adopting them as they're redesigning many of their HR processes. Relate to frequency, the level of involvement of peer-to-peer, and transparency. So frequency is about how frequently do employees get feedback? Is once a year, or twice a year, even 4 times a year enough? Is it daily, hourly, weekly? And how do we ensure that a generation that has gotten used to getting an immediate like on Facebook or immediate feedback on anything they post or do, that the feedback that they get within the organization is not completely disconnected from that rate of feedback and information? We've all gotten used to going into Wikipedia, not opening Encyclopedia Britannica, and we all use tools that are peer-to-peer for ratings when we want information about travel sites and so on. In organizations, there's also a big aspect of peer-to-peer. As organizations become more flat as you interact with more and more people, internal partners and customers, there's a lot more value in the feedback and information that's available within the organization and leveraging the peer-to-peer feedback. And we believe that that's a critical aspect in design of the performance management of the future. And employees like ourselves in this digital world have gotten used to and expect a completely different level of transparency in everything they do. Transparency with the government, transparency with their employers, transparency with their direct management. And the processes we build need to be much more transparent in the way they communicate information to us and so on. So those are a few design principles, and I won't get into more detail, although they impact in many ways things you'll see in the proposed solution we give. Technology is a very important aspect in looking at this. Technology is not only providing us with solutions to issues, it's also raising capabilities that didn't exist in the past. And we need, when we're designing our solutions in HR in general and in performance management in particular, we need to see what technology can enable. And things that maybe were not possible or were difficult or were expensive or were complex in the past are now much more easy because technology is available to do things that weren't available in the future. So it's a lot easier to manage a lot of data. It's a lot easier to do things at any time, at any place with different devices. It's a lot easier to individualize and customize things in ways that didn't exist in the past. It's a lot easier to use big data and analytics to discover different things around the performance of individuals. And we need to use technology as an enabler for many of those things when we're redesigning the performance management process. And all those impact the way we design solutions that will be both focused and simple. And in order for processes to be much more focused and more simple than they are in most organizations today, it means we need to segment them. And I want to talk about that segmentation for a couple slides, because I think they're key to what we want to propose in this entire session here. I love Dilbert, and if you've seen this Dilbert before, the processes that are currently designed in most organizations are extremely complex because organizations are trying to achieve much too many things in their design of the process, and then they're not focused and they're not simple. When we come into organizations and we ask them, what do you want to achieve in your performance management process? We get a very, very long list of objectives. And these are, I won't read them off, but these are just a few of the examples of the kinds of things that companies tell us they want to achieve. And we say, well, if you could only choose one or two of them, what would you do? And most of our clients really struggle to answer that. No, we want to do all these things. And if you're trying to do all these things in one process, there's no doubt that it becomes complicated. It becomes cumbersome. There's a lot of information. It's a long form. There's too much to analyze. You need to give too much time. And there's no surprise that all those things cause the process to be too difficult and not provide the ROI we want. And so key to what we believe needs to be the answer to that is segmentation. Now, we've gotten used to segmentation in human resources in many areas that have already become standard to the way we do things. We all understand that in compensation management, we use segmentation. Sales compensation is different than executive compensation, which is different than broadband compensation. Incentives for blue-collar employees are very different than incentive plans for white-collar employees. And we understand already that world of compensation has been segmented into professional areas that provide solutions for different populations. In learning and development, we do exactly the same thing. We don't expect leadership development to be similar to compliance work around safety and security with our employees, or to be the same around the professional development for different functions and organizations. And talent management, by definition, is a segmented approach where we identify specific target populations and provide them with unique solutions for each one of them. And so the key to what we're about to present is that the solutions to simplicity and effectiveness of performance management in this new generation is a segmented approach. And we want to provide for this session 4 archetypes. We call them archetypes because we don't think they're the answer to everything. We don't think that every organization necessarily will find itself in one or more of these. But we want to show this as an approach which we suggest you look at as you're designing your performance management, which is different than the one size fits all and tries to capture many objectives, but actually looks at different target populations with different focused objectives and therefore can provide simple, clear, focused processes. The four archetypes we're going to be talking about in more depth today are the following. The first is what we call align. And align is focused on ensuring that the business leadership of the organization, usually the top or two or three levels, maybe 50, 30, 100 people in a very large organization, maybe 200, but no more than that, are very aligned on what the business is trying to achieve and are synchronized all their efforts to be achieving those goals. The second archetype we're going to be talking about, we call engage. And it's one that many of you, I'm sure, are reading about in a lot of the newspapers and professional articles. It's around the very fast, engaging, dialogue, development-focused, future-focused kind of performance management, which is appropriate for knowledge workers with long-term results that are trying to grow and see that as part of their objective of the process. The third is a very interesting one, which we'll dive into in this session, which is we call empower. And it is more appropriate for populations with very short-term measurable results like sales, like people in a call center or help desk, or provide short-term services where the work is very quantifiable and where gamification can play a very important part in creating alignment and focusing people on the right behaviors and improvement. And the last we call differentiate. And differentiate is around how we ensure that we do identify differentiated talent, differentiated performance as a basis to tying our performance into other processes such as talent management, development, and so on. Each of these four is very different, as you're going to see. And they may live more than one of them in an organization, but each of them is very narrow and focused. So we'll go back to this in the end, but I'm going to start diving into each one of the four. And what Yoav and I are going to do for the remainder of this webinar is I will present at a very high level what we find is the core to each one of these four. And Yoav will then present how in the modern technologies, and particularly in SuccessFactors, the technology can be an enabler to actually drive this solution in a most effective way. So we're talking about align, and I mentioned this briefly. So align is really around ensuring that senior management is aligned in living the goals. Organizations have tried to cascade goals and objectives throughout the organization to all levels, to all employees. That, we believe, is to do too much with very little return on investment. But the top 30, the top 50 people in the organization may not be, and often not, very aligned. And they're not very focused on goals that they're all agreed on and collaborating to achieve those goals together. And we find the goal congruence at the top level of the organization, the top 2, 3 levels of the organization are critical. And that's where alignment and goal alignment should be focused, both in design of the goals, but also in management and performing of those goals throughout the year. And we see 4 design principles that are critical to making align work. The first is goal congruence and cascading. This is ensuring that when the goals are rolled out in the organization, there's a very, very high level of alignment between the goals of the different individuals at the high level of the organization. Part of achieving that alignment, but also in managing the expectations, is creating transparency across all levels. So ensuring that the top team of the organization all see each other's goals, understand the impact on themselves, may be able to impact those, are aware of not only the goals, but how performance is going, because they may be able to contribute or need to change their performance in light of the performance of others at that level. And so transparency is critical to drive alignment and to drive performance. We want to make sure the goals aren't just documented like in most organizations and then sit in a system or on a piece of paper throughout the year, but that there's a high level of management and living those goals throughout the year. That means there need to be processes in place to review those goals frequently, to make sure they're communicated on a regular basis, that they're tracked and tied down to day-to-day activities that are performed by those organizations. So there need to be ties between the goals and what is actually happening on the floor for these executives and their organizations day to day. And very important, in the speed that organizations are changing, traditionally, companies go through a very big exercise of aligning their goals in the beginning of the year. And as things change throughout the year, don't change them, either as a policy or because they just don't have the energy and time and effort to create that realignment of goals. We think it's critical for a small group of the top 100 or 200 in the organization to ensure that as things happen in the business throughout the year, goals are realigned, recommunicated, and transparently managed so that the whole senior team is leading the entire organization constantly in the right direction. Yoav, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Eitan. Good morning, everyone. So the purpose of my next few slides is actually to demonstrate and discuss what are the functionality areas in SuccessFactors that would be used by customers who want to focus really on the align theme or the align objective, what they should be looking at in SuccessFactors in order really to make this work, keeping in mind that they may have more than one, I would say, template for the process. One may be around the line, another one may be around engage, and so on and so forth. So now I'm going to focus mainly on those features that an organization would have to look at if you want to emphasize the align part. So basically, the idea of cascading goals from top down is a very, I would say, established and mature concept in SuccessFactors from the early beginning of SuccessFactors back 15 years ago. The features around cascading goals, linking goals, group goals, all very mature ideas that have been used by organizations for many years. However, organizations have some issues and concerns around using these features, like the cascading features are built around a model that the goals are cascaded by level. So if the CEO starts with his goals, then he needs to cascade them to the vice presidents, and then they need to cascade it to the department levels, and so on and so forth. So it's about a really kind of a waterfall model, and this is really becoming a challenge when the organization has a lot of hierarchy levels, because from time perspective, this is typically not realistic that this process will actually flow in this way, because each level needs to wait until the level above will get the goals, and so on and so forth. So in theory, these features exist and it's being used, but it's not being used very systematically by organization across the board. It's more like initiatives of managers that want to cascade their goals to the level below. We rarely see organizations that are using this very systematically top down. There are some new features that has been presented in the last year or so that, as SuccessFactors customers or prospects, to look at these features if you're really looking to use the goal alignment. And two of these features are the team goals, and the initiatives really helps to create some overarching corporate initiatives that every person in the organization can associate with without going through the tedious hierarchical structure that will flow the goals to him through the cascading model. It's some kind of overarching organizational strategic initiatives that everyone can connect his goals to. In addition, the system now provides a very nice kind of a workbench to the owner of the initiatives to see how many people has actually connected their goals to those initiatives. So we're actually kind of making the organization more flat in the respect of goals alignment, and we're now being able to connect goals to those overarching initiatives without the whole hierarchy burden. So this is something that I really recommend to look at. These are the team goals and the initiatives. There is another important point which is a key to achieve a successful goal alignment And this is about making the alignment, the goal alignment visible to the organization to measure how much alignment is really being achieved through the system. And there are some examples to how to achieve that. One, as you can see here, is the execution map that allows the organization to see how goals has been cascaded and to see the flow from the very top level to downstream the organization, how the goals has been connected. So this gives a very good indication about the health of the alignment in the organization, how it was really used in the system. There are some other interesting functionality. There is a very mature functionality around line of sight, so a manager can take a goal if he's an executive person, and he can see down the organization how many people are working on this goal, no matter in which level. And last but not least is the idea of understanding how many of the objectives are visible, how many of them are private versus public. Whoever doesn't know this idea with SuccessFactors for a goal, we can set attribute that says if it's a public goal or a private goal. Obviously, public goals means that these goals are more transparent and more people can connect to it. So this is another nice feature that can show you how many of the goals are public versus private. Last slide that I would like to discuss, or last feature about Align, connecting to what Eitan said, I think that when we speak about the Align archetype, we're really speaking about putting the goals in the center, making really goals the center of the process and making them really matter. And in order that for goals to really matter, it needs also to be connected to other things. And for example, connecting goals to compensation. This slide shows, for example, how goals can be connected to compensation, and I want you to differentiate between connecting the performance rating to compensation, and just to highlight the fact that this is very different than connecting individual goals to MBO plans, which is also possible in the system through the compensation model. Just to summarize my part, if company wants to really focus on the align archetype and to goals really in the center, it should be looking at features such as the initiatives like the team goals, use a lot of reporting to show how much of the goals are being really aligned, and last but not least, to make sure that goals are really connected to our other processes such as the compensation.
Thanks, Yoav. So we'll talk about the second archetype, which we call engage. And this is really the one that looks at many of the employees in the organization, particularly those who are white-collar employees in most cases who are working on long-term activities, whether marketing, sales, HR, finance, developers. And that's where a lot of discussion has been in many of the newspapers and so on around. We need to make this much more adapted to this digital age, much more flexible, much more fast, much more frequent, much more fun, and much more focused on development and growth, and much more of a dialogue and not a top-down activity. And so when we look at engage, we see 5 really key design principles that should be part of that, the way we design engage. The first is around content rich. So many organizations have forms that are very focused on numbers. So here are a lot of items, whether they're values or their competencies or their skills, or they're just the objectives, which are just, you've got yes, no, high, low, and a scale of 1 to 6, so a scale to 1 to 10. That's valuable, and some of that will continue, but what people want in the engage model is they want real deep valuable feedback that helps them improve, that helps them understand where they've been successful and where they haven't. And so although there should continue to be some objective performance data on results, there also needs to be feedback that's very rich in the way it's presented around behaviors, around interactions, around processes, around results, and needs to be real life evidence and examples, so that the way we collect information, some of it in systems, but also a lot of it verbally and in dialogue, need to be very rich in the value it presents. So that's one aspect that when we're designing these processes, we need to look at how they enable that. The second is looking at multi-assessor and peer-to-peer. We discussed that as a principle earlier. So in many organizations, the engage archetype needs to enable almost anyone to provide almost anyone else with feedback. That could be up, down, left, right, across boundaries of the organization, not only within a team like a 360, but with internal clients and even external people that work with the organization, suppliers, customers, and others. They need to provide a rich, because the relationships are very different within such a complex environment, some of the ways to give feedback can be very simple, just a badge or a like, just a positive sign. But some of it needs to be really enabling to give deep, valuable feedback, whether it's written or verbal, to the employees. There needs to be a platform for peer recognition. This is where many organizations are starting their path, even if not around peer-to-peer assessment, but a way for employees to recognize successful peers. And that's often a beginning to start, because it's harder to give negative feedback on peers, but at least to give positive feedback and see who are the people who are getting multiple positive feedbacks from the environment around them. And we talk a lot about a concept of reputation capital. If you'll look for a wonderful TED film around reputation capital, people are building reputation capital, whether it's been on peer-to-peer sites and whether it be on LinkedIn. That's who their connections are, who turns to them, who knows them, who appreciates their work. And that has real value in the flat, interactive world of today. And so we want to enable that. We want to provide an environment where people are building up their reputation capital. And when many people are getting your help and providing positive feedback to you, it means you're contributing positively to the organization. We want to recognize that. We need to, of course, make sure that the feedback is frequent and immediate. It means that it can't just happen when HR open a system. It has to happen all the time and any time as needed. And if it needs to be available, then it needs to be available on any system and on mobile devices. So when you're on a break and outside or taking a walk on the weekend, and you remember something you think about one of your peers or employees, you can quickly jot it down and make it part of this process, and not just something formal that happens in front of a complicated process on a computer. Of course, not everything is digital, and it's very important that the process needs to be designed so there's significant amount of dialogue about results, dialogue about the process, dialogue about how you can improve, and that things are much more fluid. Employees expect that the discussion between mature adults, and we want to not just look at this as a top-down, but as a learning process between the individual and his manager and organization. And particularly with the focus of people on their growth and their career and their what's in it for me, process entirely needs to be very focused, forward-looking. So even if we're talking about something that happened yesterday or happened last month, we need to talk mostly around how that is motivating to make a change, what I need to do better next time, and not a lot less energy about what happened in the past, and how that's linked into the learning and development opportunities that the organization has to offer, so that I can actually leverage this and not just have it as just a feedback.
So now we're going to discuss what organizations that are looking at the engage model should be looking at in SuccessFactors. So the first piece of functionality that might be very interesting in such situation is, of course, the CPM, or the continuous performance management, that has been introduced about a year and a half ago and drives a lot of interest from customers and SuccessFactors users. So I guess some of you are already looking at CPM, but for those of you who doesn't know it too much, I want to spend 1 or 2 minutes about explaining what it is doing and how it is structured. The foundation of the CPM are actually 5 different entities. Activities are actually enabling the users to keep track of items that the person is working on. Activities is reflecting what is the employee is doing on a daily basis, and that serves as a very good starting point for discussion, because many of the discussion between employees and managers is actually about what they're doing, what they should be doing. The second entity that is covered by CPM is topic. Topic is something that either the employee or the manager want to discuss. It's not an activity, it's not something that needs to be done. It's just a topic for discussion. Coaching will typically flow from the manager to the employee. And the idea of coaching with CPM is that it should be very, very short. It can be either positive or negative, but it should probably be one sentence. Think of the idea of Twitter and think how valuable sometimes is limiting the length of communication. It's just a short thing to say, positive or negative. The fourth element is achievement. An achievement brings the idea of motivating the employees through small achievements, small things that they have done. We don't have to wait for the full year end to give big recognition. If someone has done something small, he completed an activity in a good way, then we can mark this as an achievement. So he had to complete a milestone in a project, not something big. He finished it on time. We can make this activity an achievement. And then this achievement will be reflected at the end of the year in the full cycle. And the last element that is part of the CPM is meetings. So the whole idea of CPM is creating a solid framework for the communication between the employee and the managers. This communication always happens. Almost every organization, there are meetings or calls between managers and employees. The idea here is just to make this more structured through these four elements that I mentioned before: activity, topic, coaching, and achievement. These are the key, I would say, elements of CPM. It's all built around these 5 topics. Here are some screenshots about CPM. So we can see from here on the first slideshow marked with the number 1 on it, we can see how a manager can see all of his direct employees and can discuss the activities with them. The screen be presented in the mobile phone, and how a manager can create an activity and capture a meeting. And we can see in the screenshot with the number 5 attached to it, you can see how topics are being presented in CPM, and we can see that topics that has been discussed already can have check mark, and then can move on and clear those topics from the list. So the idea, again, just to summarize this, the CPM idea, is to create a really structured framework for the discussions between the employee and the manager to capture this, the content of this discussion in a way that will allow to go back to this information at the end of the year for when we're doing the full cycle of the performance evaluation, and just to have this information very available so we'll not have to spend too much time about the past. The feedback, the small feedback interaction has already been given throughout the year, and now we can focus on the forward-looking discussion, just as Eitan mentioned before. One of the points that Eitan mentioned was the idea of peers, how we involve peers in such processes, how we are avoiding the top-down interaction and include some peer-to-peer interactions. And there are many ways to do it now in SuccessFactors. So if companies are looking to involve peers more, I would like to show you 2 things. One is something which is already being presented for 3 years at least, and this is the request feedback that exists in the team view in performance management. So I guess many of you know the idea of feedback from others, which is provided in performance management. If you're not familiar with it, please let us know after the webinar, and we'll, of course, be happy to demonstrate this to you. The more interesting part, which is quite new now, is involving peers in recognitions and awards, which is a new functionality that is presented under the compensation module. And this allows now peers to nominate their colleagues for some kind of recognition, for a spot bonus, or for anything like that. So you can see that the idea of peers' influence is becoming more and more part of the way that SuccessFactors is working, because this is exactly part of the digital age and the digital transformation, having more of peers' influence in those processes. The last point that I would like to discuss about engage is, again, tying to an idea that Eitan mentioned about rich content. So just showing a functionality which is very mature, that is there for many years, but still we see customers that are not familiar with it. And this is the feedback, the idea of the wizard or the writing assistant feature, which allows managers and employees to create feedback and to provide rich language around feedback, which is connected to competencies. So if I would like to have to provide feedback around teamwork, as you can see here in the example, then I can select if I want to have a feedback around improvement, meeting, or exceeding, and then I can click on the language here and I can adjust it. And the idea is that the system provides you a very good starting point for the feedback, and then I can, of course, adjust it to my needs. So this feature really supports the idea of rich content. Like this feature, we have several features in SuccessFactors.
The third archetype is empower. Although there are some similarities between empower and engage, it's built on a very, very different premise for very, very different organizational situations. On a personal basis, this is my daughter, Shai. She's 9 years old. And I had a wonderful experience with her recently around gamification. Shai's not a very good math student, but the education system in Israel recently had a very big competition, gamified competition in math between schools, and the children had to solve multiple mathematical questions based on their level inside a game. And Shai, unnatural to her, unusual to her, spent every afternoon, ran home from school, sat down in front of the computer, and spent hours solving mathematical questions in order to advance in the game, collect points, compare with her friends, and help her school come out one of the top 20 schools in the country. I thought that was a very interesting insight into how gamification in the younger generations is impacting the way people are performing. And when we talk about empower, which is the third archetype, we're really talking about a target population that has short-term measurable goals in businesses where it's possible to gamify their work in a way that makes it interesting, provides immediate feedback, and can tie the way performance is being done immediately into improving performance and driving learning around it. So this could be short-term sales, services teams, and so on. We see 4 design principles for Empower. First and foremost, it has to be extremely quantitative. So if in knowledge workers, where Engage might work very well because it's very hard to quantify the work of an HR professional, here is where the work needs to be very objective, very fair feedback. It needs to be tied to key performance indicators of the work and constantly be showing where you stand against yourself, against your records, against peers, around other things that are very quantifiable. So the work needs, it's only relevant for roles that are similar to that. The second aspect is real time. So in many organizations, people get feedback in these kinds of roles once a week, at the end of their day, maybe once a month, and not real time. And the idea of Empower is to provide much, much shorter real-time feedback loops so that people can see the connection between specific performance they're doing in a sales call, in an activity, in a service, and immediately see how that's impacting the results that they're doing. So it needs to be real-time, and organizations historically have struggled in bringing the real-time individual information to them. The third, which is critical to this, where we find some of the innovation and opportunity, is around gamification. The idea of using techniques from gamification to making challenges, results fun, to make them engagement, to collecting, to showing them as part of, here's a record I'm breaking, here's how I'm doing versus my peers. We play games all the time, and we want to bring those principles into work. And the last, which is really critical, is how those are tied into learning. So it's not only about getting feedback, but we want continuous improvement around performance. We can tie gaps in performance through immediate real-time quantitative feedback so that you can improve. So if a certain kind of sales situation is not performing well, we can tie it immediately to learning activities which will help address those needs. And so when all this is working very well, there's also a continuous improvement of the performance.
We'll discuss how to use gamification in a slightly different way. We'll not present SuccessFactors here. We'll present a partner of SuccessFactors, which is integrated to SuccessFactors. So it's actually an add-on. This is called Game Effective, and this is kind of a tool that is specializing in a gamification for performance management and e-learning. At the right hand, you can see some great customers like Microsoft that are using a gamification. The idea with gamification is to provide a totally different experience around the performance management. So it's not about a form like we're used to. It's a very day-to-day type of thing, which is much more engaging and provide a totally different experience. In order for this to be successful, the goals and the personal KPIs must be fixed, and the content of these KPIs must flow from typically another system, like a CRM system or like a service system. So all of this information about the personal goals will be updated in real time. At the center of the screen, we can see here the metaphor that we're using in this specific gamification tool. And in this specific example, the metaphor or the analogy we're using is a car race. So the idea here is that the employee is racing against his peers and colleagues in the team. And this metaphor provides a lot of engagement and a lot of fun in this process. So this is really about how we take the simple idea of performance management and turn it into a game in a very specific circumstances of a call center or a sales team or service team.
So the fourth archetype is differentiate. And if we've assumed that now senior leadership has been aligned and different types of employees have continuous feedback, whether it's an engaged type of feedback or an empower type of feedback, which we discussed, then there's still a need for organizations to create some understanding for them of the differentiation within populations. But now that the issues of feedback and growth and learning and continuous improvement have been treated in other areas in alignment, it's possible to look at differentiation in a very focused way. Performance management isn't dying because organizations still find it very important to know who is good, who's less good, who's contributing, and tie all kinds of other HR processes to that. So the objective of differentiation is really segmenting people into different groups. And that may be now more transparent or less transparent given our principle that we said earlier around transparency, but it can be done in a different way, in a much more faster and focused way, if the other aspects of performance and dialogue and feedback and growth have been addressed in other ways. And so the objective of this is really mostly around creating those segmentations and differentiations between different individuals and identifying key populations. The differentiate aspect is very simple and quick, not very complicated processes of calibration, but using visualization, using information that's available to make things a lot easier to quickly put people into the right buckets and compare people. We want to make sure that the process is fair and consistent and unbiased. And so we want to use information and technology to make sure that biases are being put aside, that the calibration process is more consistent, managers are doing the same kind of thing in the same way. We want to use the outcome of the differentiate process to link tightly into other HR processes, obviously into compensation in most organizations, obviously into learning and development activities, but into talent populations, succession management processes, and so on. And we need to make sure that there's actionable communication. So now that the feedback aspect was addressed in other areas, there's only a question of who needs to know output of my differentiated scores. Am I in a talent pool that I need to do something to develop? Do I need to now improve my performance in order to stay in my role? So very much more focused communication only to the specific populations given the specific objectives of being placed into there. So this is a very focused way of putting people in the right categories for the organizational needs.
Differentiation is supported in SuccessFactors across the board. There are many features that can support the differentiation, starting from the multi-rater that we can see here in the examples, or a pod at the top of the performance form that allows me in real time to see where is the employee ranked among his team based on the rating I've just filled in for him, and so on and so forth. A key of functionality to really make differentiation effective is the calibration feature. We see, I would say, about 50% of the SuccessFactors customers that we see are using the calibration, so we believe that there is still a room to explore the calibration and how this can be helpful for SuccessFactors users to optimize the differentiation process. Here we can see an example. It's really a cool functionality and I think drives a lot of satisfaction.
Thanks, Yoav. So our summary messages are all around segmentation and focus. And with the segmentation and focus can be very much simpler and much more effective processes that fit the needs of organizations better today. We've presented 4 archetypes, and this slide summarizes what each of them are and what we believe their design principles are, but they're not necessarily the only ones. We encourage you to think about what your objectives are, focus the segmentation on building solutions to each, and we believe that SuccessFactors has developed functionality that really enables both these 4, as you've seen through our presentation, but many other different plays on combinations of these and still keep them very simple and easy and much faster and relevant for the populations of organizations today. So we'd like to thank you.